Cool. So yeah, thanks again for joining everyone. My name is Zach Davey. I'm one of the admissions officers at RISD, and I'm also alum from the school. I graduated in 2020 from the painting department, and I'll be giving today's presentation of portfolio tips presentation on technical and experimental expression. So just a variation of our basic portfolio tips presentation. If you've seen it before, you might see it starts out pretty similarly at first, but then we'll dive into what it really means to experiment in your portfolio and think about expression in a variety of different ways. So yeah, I'll pass it to my colleague today who will be helping out in the chat, Maren.
Hello, everyone. My name is Maren Brennan. I'm excited to be here to join Zach. I will be acting as chat manager, which means I'll be in the background while Zach gives this really exciting presentation. I'll be dropping some links in the regular chat box, and I will be fielding questions in the Q&A chat box. So please, 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 if you have any questions, first of all, I recommend waiting till it's towards the end of the presentation because there's a good chance your answer will be revealed in the presentation itself. But if you don't want to forget any questions or anything like that, please enter it in the Q&A chat box. I don't want your questions to get buried in the regular chat box. As you saw, it's really easy. Everybody, chiming in, it's pretty easy for that to happen. So Q&A chat box is a few icons to the right, or it might, if you click on the three dots, you might find it there. And then I'll reappear after the presentation and we'll answer some questions live. All right, take it away, Zach.
Thanks, Maren. So yeah, I'll go ahead and share my screen. Does everything look okay, Maren?
It looks great. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you. So yeah, I'll turn off my camera as well during the presentation, and then I'll join back in over camera for Q&A if I can find the stop video button. There we go. Cool. So thank you all again for joining. Welcome, welcome. Again, this is Portfolio Tips, Technical and Experimental Expression. Firstly, congrats on starting up another school year. I know many folks will be beginning their senior year here and college applications in the fall, but some are only just starting to think about college. So this presentation will be helpful regardless of what place you're at in your college application journey, and will provide you with some insight into the RISD admissions process alongside some tips and tricks for various ways of working. So let's start with the basic requirements. Your RISD portfolio is meant to be a highly curated, limited selection of just your strongest examples of visual artwork. You'll use SlideRoom, an online portfolio platform, to submit your portfolio to RISD. If you're wondering what the heck is SlideRoom, that's okay. We'll go over how to use SlideRoom in another application prep series this fall. But in SlideRoom, you'll need to include at least 12 pieces and you'll have up to 20 slots you can fill. You do not need to max out all 20 slots. The limited space of the application portfolio requires careful selection of which pieces to include and deciding which pieces to exclude. Please include only the pieces that you feel are the strongest, most interesting to you, and the most unique to you. This can include process and preliminary pieces. This can include sketchbook pages. This can include design or architectural work. You'll use the online portfolio application platform SlideRoom to submit your portfolio to RISD. So this does require digital documentation of your work. We don't accept physical works via the mail, but we do accept digital works via platform. And keep in mind, there's no longer a RISD assignment. You may look around online and see something called the RISD assignments. This used to be a requirement of our portfolio, but no longer is. So again, we just require for the portfolio at least just require the 12 to 20 examples of your first of your best work. I see Maren put a link in the chat to all of our application requirements so you can see them there, all on the RISD website. So, generally, when we're reviewing our application portfolio, we're looking for your creativity, personality, experimentation, unique points of view, risk-taking, unique ideas, curiosity, and thoughtful visual decisions. And we'll be going over all of these with a special focus on experimentation in this presentation. So, when we review your portfolio, we also look to see if you'd be a good fit for how RISD teaches. Your RISD education will begin with the Experimental and Foundation Studies program, or EFS for short. We'll take all incoming first-year students and we'll divide you into sections of 20. And as a section of 20 students, you'll take 3 studio art courses. These are in design, drawing. Keep in mind the students experimenting by creating their own drawing tool, something I encourage you all to attempt, And lastly, spatial dynamics, or admittedly our fancy term for 3D design and sculpture. So it's a good idea to keep these three EFS classes in mind when putting together your portfolio. So again, since all first-year students begin their RISD education in this program, Experimental Foundation Studies, this means that you will not be applying directly to a major. This means that your work shouldn't be restricted to one interest or medium. It's a good idea to consider general values that we hold near, like experimentation, process, conceptual thought, creative problem solving, and technical skills. In this artist boot camp, as you can call it, you'll expand the way you work in size and approach. Some more examples from our drawing classes. You can start by drawing from observation and then delve more into abstraction if that's something that interests you. We always encourage all sorts of experimentation. So in this program, you'll learn to think outside the box and look at your ideas from multiple perspectives. Today, we'll go over some tips on how to broaden your creative practice. So first, think about using everyday materials in unconventional ways. You can see two examples of performance art via drawing here. There's inspiration all around us. Open your eyes to how we interact with objects, especially common objects, and how you can utilize them in new ways. For example, this student on the left would draw with ink onto ice cubes, let that melt onto the paper below. Then the students on the right would create a performative drawing piece too with this machine that they had built. And nature is full of materials for you to play with. So is your sock drawer. You can make work out of your socks, out of nature, or natural materials rather, like pebbles, sticks, etc. The different patterns used in the portrait on the right really add to the joyous expression and personality of this piece, as do the various colors and letters from cereal boxes to construct this dress. So just because we rarely use CDs anymore doesn't mean there isn't a purpose for them, as for example, an astounding piece of jewelry. I'm glad the artists on the piece on the right didn't listen to their parents when they told them not to play with their food. It's a fun example of typography here, thinking about something like a banana. Again, you can use natural materials in really unconventional ways. And these, for example, the textures in this piece are just incredible. Their use of material makes the image so tactile, even just looking at it. They're really thinking about surface and variety in an unconventional way, all with really natural materials. Why not repurpose childhood friends into fashion or natural items into sculptures, like wood and pebbles and sticks and such? And keep in mind, if you're working with drawing and painting, anything can be a surface. Consider using patterned fabric instead of a white canvas. Use the pattern as part of the artwork and let it show through. This couch serves as an interesting woodland backdrop to the water made from a blanket. And your surface can be a functional object as well. Some more examples here, combining drawing, painting with sculpture. And think about how you can use color as a tool for adding character to your piece. Really, really experiment with your color. Think about it as a tool to convey different kinds of messages and not just drawing colors, painting colors that we see naturalistically. Really think about how you can go beyond that with your color. Light can be expressive when using color in a creative way. Complementary colors can speak volumes. And play with the textures of your colors to create a mood or tone in your work. Think about how patterns can move the viewer's eye around. And challenge yourself to not use black and white in a project. Think about how you can use maybe a more limited color palette that maybe is outside of your comfort zone, not color that we see naturalistically. Again, just showing us your willingness to experiment with color and your approach to it. Blocks of color don't just have to be made from paint as well. They can be collaged items you bring together. Some more examples of collage with drawing and painting here. You can see two very different executions. Yes, that's what I meant to say. If you're interested in film, animation, or video, spend time on your lighting too. This really applies to all mediums and approaches. And combine disciplines together as well. For example, textiles and ceramics, drawing and jewelry, sculpture and jewelry. The reason we're saying this isn't just arbitrary as well. This is really to encourage you all to think about how to push mediums and materials forward. Not a lot of students will combine their mediums together, so it's a very quick way to help your portfolio stand out from other applicants. Sewing and jewelry, film and glass, photo projection and sculpture, photography and sculpture, painting and ceramics. And also think about how you can combine the 2D with the 3D. Play with creating more depth in your composition by physically layering the paper. A small part of a 2D piece can be 3D and still add a lot. Or it can go all out with 3D materials as well. Create a 3D model, shine a light on it, draw or paint directly from that. It's always great to see students thinking about how they can draw and paint from their own models. I would recommend going this route over a traditional still life with flower and a vase and an apple any day. This will give us so much more of a unique insight into your creative practice than more traditional subject matter would. It all comes down to execution, but I think that can be very helpful nonetheless. And if you're interested in something like graphic design, again, this applies to graphic design, architecture, every kind of approach within visual art and design. You bring expression to typography and imagery, for example. Experiment with how typography can play a part in the composition of a piece. Allow the direction of the typography to move the viewer's eye around. And try creating dimension with graphic shapes. Layers of text and graphic images can still create volume. And keep manipulating. There's always ways you can bring your work further. You can try layering, collaging. Again, play with combining 2D and 3D. Incorporate mixed media on top of your photographs. For example, pebbles on top of a crumpled photo of a bird's nest and empty thread spools on top of a portrait. Create patterns with cutouts and layers. This artist combined printed photographs and used charcoal to disrupt and integrate the space, creating the eerie, liminal, foggy, and simultaneously geographic space. Disrupt the piece entirely to create a different tone or make the exterior more than just a way to display the work. Take your 2D physical media and import them into a digital program of your choice. Play around with digital collage and embrace the medium as its own sort of sketchbook page. Can also play around with programming and coding to create digital artwork. We keep in mind we absolutely welcome digital work in your portfolio, but also please make sure to include some physical, hands-on materials as well. We like to see students are well-rounded, and yeah, seeing some at least some physical work in your portfolio is important to us because you'll have to work with physical media a lot in the first year at RISD. But yeah, creative coding. So wonderful route to go. I believe these were both made in processing, either processing or P5JS. If anyone has any questions on that, always happy to chat about those. Try experimenting and playing around with layers. You will always want to consider composition and creating push and pull in your pieces. Layering mediums and or colors to help create that effect. Create textures with layering and mark making. Mark making referring to how we create marks in a drawing or painting. And the variety of those marks themselves. You can see in the painting on the right, there's so many different approaches to how this artist created marks within the painting. Some are photographic processes, some are with small pen points, some are with quick smudges of paint, some are quite obviously with brushes. There's a lot of different processes and textures and approaches to how this painter created their marks. And lines don't need to be made with a pen or pencil. They can be embroidered. Again, collage, mixed media. This is always great to think about with all aspects of art and design. Whether it's in 3D, 2D, or a combination of the two, layers add another element for the viewer to explore. Create work that engages the viewer. Art is meant to be engaging, and some pieces go beyond that by inviting interaction, like a board game. When documenting this kind of interactive work, show viewers engaging with the piece. This can often be more impactful than just showing us the piece itself. Installation art, or public art rather. And think about movement too. Movement can be expressed in still images, but you can also experiment with kinetic work as well and see how the piece engages with the space that it exists in. Practice restriction and limitation. So, all of these were tips on how to approach your creative practice in new ways. We are all creatures of habit, so it's natural to have a tendency to stay in our comfort zone and repeat what works for you. But I really encourage you all to step outside of your comfort zone. Make a list of what you tend to do most often in your work, perhaps in your concepts or compositions or in the materials you use. Then make work that doesn't utilize anything on that list and see what you come up with. Try not to put pressure on yourself by thinking too much about the portfolio. Really just try new things and see where it takes you. It can be frustrating when projects don't turn out as we plan, but being open and curious about multiple outcomes can lead to some really incredible artwork. Sometimes the mistakes you make end up being the most exciting work you create. And I know when it doesn't work out, it can be frustrating, but when it does work out, it's so exciting. And again, when it doesn't work out, you'll still learn from that as well. You're always learning as you're making art in your practice. Maybe you're listening to this advice and thinking, yeah, right, but it's necessary to make more pieces than you expect to put in your portfolio. It gives yourself so many more options. And I know making a portfolio may seem like a monumental task. Just start with making as much work as you can. Don't worry if it's portfolio ready just yet. And then decide what pieces will go into your portfolio closer to the deadline. We'll have more webinars later in the fall that will speak more to choosing what pieces to put in your portfolio. But for the time being, just have fun, focus on making, don't get too wrapped up in what's portfolio worthy. And if you want feedback on your portfolio, we have some online portfolio days coming up too this fall, all listed here. There's one this Saturday. And that's a little bit of everything. Thank you all so much for joining. I hope that was helpful, informative, gave some insight into all the things we think about when it comes to expression, and experimentation, and creativity and portfolios. Again, just a very brief outline, but hopefully this gave you some ideas to brainstorm up new ways you could work in your own practice. So yeah, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Marion, we can jump into some questions now.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. That was fantastic. So we have a few questions. Wow. Okay. The first one is for works where the concept is more powerful than the finished piece, like experimental sketchbooks or participatory projects, how do I present them without them looking underdeveloped?
Yeah, I mean, I would consider a portfolio review because oftentimes what we think looks underdeveloped may not actually be underdeveloped. It really depends on the work, though. And if I would go with your gut, if this really does feel like it presents itself as underdeveloped, think about how you can keep working into it. Again, one of the slides said keep manipulating. That's what I would encourage. Keep thinking about how you can work back into your work. And if there's, for example, sometimes a student will make a drawing, it feels like they're in the right stage and they don't know how to move beyond it. Try making a digital copy of that work and then printing it out, working on top of that copy. That way, if you're manipulating a copy, you don't have to worry about the finished piece getting ruined, for example. You can just keep working on the new iteration. So that would be my recommendation. Think about how you can make copies of the work and work back into those.
Excellent. This person is wondering about the documentation of process in a RISD or any portfolio what do we, I mean, kind of, this kind of stems off of what you were just talking about, but what do you guys think of including documentation? I guess actually, do you mean, I'm wondering if this person means like the process, like documenting the process?
Yeah, or maybe like documentation of the portfolio as a whole too, like how they take photos and stuff.
Right, right, yeah.
Yeah, so documentation, there's a couple of things we think about, but just to summarize, the clear, simplest way you can submit your work is probably the best way. We want to see clear, easy to see images of the work. Students tend to submit too many images. They put too much writing on their slides, so lots of explanations about every piece. Please do not submit a heavily formatted portfolio. We just want to see clear, easy to see images of your work. Oftentimes, if you submit more than 2 to 3 photos in a single slide, they get really tiny and blurry, and we don't want to see fancy formatting. We just want to see the work itself. You don't have to think about the design of your slides and if it's cohesive. We just want to see the work itself. So yeah, it should fill up the entire frame, 2 to 3 images, and all text writing about the work should be reserved for the place where you input title, medium, and description in Slideroom, not on the image itself. When we review it, we'll see them right next to each other, so you don't even have to worry about that. Yeah, I think we have a curating your portfolio tips webinar. I'm not sure if we have another one this fall, but I actually have some events myself where I'll be talking about curating your portfolio, how to document your work and stuff. I mostly work with international students, so it's intended for those, but it's open to everyone. If you want more information on how to curate your portfolio, I'll put a link to sign up for those in the chat. But yeah, I think we have some public ones too on the RISD website. Marin, if you could put the RISD info session link in the chat, that'd be awesome.
Yes, I can in just a moment. Do we have to provide drawing work such as sketching? I do a lot of, I, I, I think they're saying they work with a lot of different materials, but drawing, they're not the strongest at drawing.
You are not required to submit drawings in your portfolio. However, you'll have to draw a lot in the first year, so including at least a few drawings from observation can help build our confidence in your portfolio. But still have fun with these. There's a lot of pieces in the presentation that I showed that were very experimental, very expressive, but they still showed us the students' drawing capabilities. Also, you mentioned that you had experience and strengths with other materials. How could you use those materials to draw from observation? When we say drawing from observation, we don't care if it's charcoal or oil paint or what material it is. It could be collage. It could use no traditional drawing materials. We saw a lot of work with like sculptures from natural elements and collages with fabric and wire and textiles. Really feel free to think about how you can take your skill set and apply it to something like drawing from observation. And if it's more experimental, more expressive, awesome. That can be great for us to see. So yeah, I would encourage you to think about how you can think about working from observation in general. It doesn't have to be traditional charcoal still life. It can be really whatever you want it to look like.
So this is a question about if someone's interested in a major, if they're applying as a first year, roughly how many pieces can be major specific? And I'd also like to lump in there, somebody was asking who's interested in applying as a transfer, what would you say would be the good ratio or amount of pieces that are major specific in a transfer portfolio too?
Yeah. So if you're applying I'll start with the first year application. If you're applying as a first year, I would say as long as the major specific work isn't the majority of the portfolio, and when I say majority, I mean one specific medium. So for example, if you want to apply for fashion design, less than 50% of the portfolio should be strictly fashion design. And that's not a strict requirement, that's just my recommendation. There's no strict number of this should be foundational work and this should be major specific work. It's really up to you. Yeah, it depends on the portfolio, but I think as a good measure, as long as less than 50% of the portfolio is devoted to one medium and you're really showing variety, that's Great. For transfer students, you do apply directly to a major, so the opposite is true. I would recommend the majority of the work be geared towards the major you're applying for. So at least 50% of the work in your portfolio geared towards the major you're applying for. Again, I say 50%, that's not strict requirements, or we're not that strict about what we see. It really comes down to the quality of the portfolio itself. But again, for transfer students, majority of the portfolio. For first year students, we like to see variety and recommended not to have more than half the portfolio be just one discipline.
Mhm. I did want to add, because the initial question had like this specific one for apparel. So I just wanted to add, they're asking, is it helpful to show experience in specific areas like sewing and pattern drafting? I mean, certainly just, think of RISD because it is a design school. So we want to see your designs. We want to see if you're working in a 3D, if you're interested in working in a major that's predominantly 3D, seeing something, actual garments or some things that are more sculptural is definitely going to be, I think, more interesting. Um, and so obviously that would showcase your showing or your sewing skills, but that would be more interesting than say like only showing apparel, like fashion drawings. Similarly, if you're interested in architecture, showing actual 3D models and creative architectural drawings instead of just like floor plans is definitely preferable. Again, we want to see your personality and your design mentality in your work. Um, let's see. Can you speak to if someone wanted to include some work that features other artists' work, like this person wants to use their mom's drawing in a piece, I guess, as a part of the piece itself. How would you go about disclosing that information and everything?
Yeah, it really depends on the work. I think if it's a significant part of the piece, please disclose that in the description. In the description of the piece, say this piece utilizes this painting from this artist, this painting from my mom, for example, and how much of the work is that? What did you do in the making of this work? What kind of revisions or edits or yeah, what was your hand in the work essentially? I'd be very clear about that in the description. But if it's something like this massive collage with uh, hundreds of different famous paintings or even unfamous paintings, I don't think you need to include every single person if it's a collage and it's very distinctly your own and your own hands within it. But if it's like pretty a significant part of the piece, then I would disclose that in the description for sure.
Yeah. Um, Let me see. We get this question quite a bit, so this is kind of more like technicality, but um, I just wanted to mention, the 12 to 20 different examples of work should be at least 12 different examples of work. So you can certainly dedicate more than one slide to one project. That's absolutely fine. But we hope that if when we're kind of just looking at it overall, we don't count out like say just 5 different works. We want to see at least 12 different examples of work. So I do just want to clarify that because we get that question a lot. We got it today. And so you have 20 slides to play with, but okay, so let's see. How much weight is placed on experimenting with different mediums in the portfolio? If your strongest work is in one medium, is it better to apply with the strongest work in a single medium or show a diversity of mediums?
It depends. It depends on how weak some of the other mediums are and how strong the one medium is. It really, that's a question that's tough for me to answer without seeing your portfolio. So I would actually recommend for you, I think that's a really great question to ask in a portfolio review with RISD. Generally, we recommend variety and think about, if you have one skill set in one specific area, think about how you can bring it to other approaches. We showed so many examples of that in this presentation in terms of if you're interested in painting, we showed examples of painting in ceramics, painting on found objects and other materials in this presentation. You don't need to, when you say variety, you don't need to go out and make a formal ceramic sculpture of a face. It really is up to you, and we're just encouraging you to take your skill set apply it to different approaches. So yeah, that'd be my number one recommendation between now and the deadline is to start thinking about how you can bring your current interests and skill set into different approaches. But in the meantime, I think that's a great question to ask in a portfolio review.
Mhm. And kind of similarly to that, I just want to say, if you have mostly 2D work or mostly 3D work, that's okay. Just because you're applying to EFS doesn't mean you have to show examples of drawing, of design, and spatial dynamics. So variety is great, but not just variety for variety's sake. Like truly, we're going to encourage you to step outside the box and try new things, but you really, only want to include the best of what you've done, and not just throwing something in there to show that you've done it. How do RISD reviewers respond to bilingual or cross-cultural references? For example, using Korean language or cultural symbols in works. Should I explain them or let ambiguity stand?
Great question. That's completely up to you. I think it depends on your intentions, how much you want us to know about the piece. If there's a reference you really want us to be familiar with, by all means, feel free to write about it in the description of the piece. Otherwise, if you think the ambiguity is really important to the piece, go for it. That's a great question. I would actually trust your gut with it. If you're more familiar than the references than we might be, then I think you might have a stronger inclination as to whether or not to write about in the description.
Excellent. Um, I'm starting my AP portfolio my junior year. Can portfolio pieces only pertain to my AP art, or can I create pieces on my own and submit them for my portfolio my senior year?
Yeah, you can absolutely create works on your own in addition to works you've created for classes like AP art, IB art, whatever it might be. Yeah, we actually encourage it. Oftentimes we find students tend to show a little bit more of their personality in their work that they make outside of class. So we definitely recommend it.
Mhm. Um, I also just wanted to just reiterate, because this is another question we have, just to reiterate process work versus finished work. You're welcome to include anywhere in the range of 12 to 20 different examples of work. Again, it should be at least 12 different examples. Most of that work should be finished and fully realized. You're welcome to include process, but we recommend up to 3 examples of process. We don't need to see process work or see like a time lapse video of you painting or something for each finished piece. So you're welcome again, like, but be discerning, choose strong examples of work that showcases your creative development and mapping out. So I just saw that question again. I wanted to just reiterate what you've already said. What is an appropriate way to digitally submit a 3D piece? Are we able to submit multiple photos of the same work from varying angles?
Yeah, you can totally do that. There's no strict right or wrong way in terms of doing that. It depends on the piece. It depends on what you want to communicate about your piece. You can absolutely submit multiple photos of different angles. Just, I would say no more than 2 to 3 images in a single slide, unless you submit a video slideshow. So you could also take multiple photos of different angles and upload it as a slideshow. You upload a video file and you show one photo after the next, just a couple of seconds on each photo. No fancy editing, no music, just clear, easy to see, simple images. That can be really helpful for us because I know that's not conventional, but it helps to see the work as large as it possibly can be. And then on our end, we can pause, we can scrub around the video. That's really helpful for us. So yeah, and there's no right or wrong way. If you also want to try um, taking a video around your sculpture, you can also do that. There's one thing I'd recommend when it comes to documenting 3D work that not a lot of students will consider is think about lighting and shadows. How can you light it in an unusual way that will really accentuate it? Could shadows become part of the piece? A lot of times 3D work will generate really interesting shadows that you can use to your advantage in the documentation. So yeah, really experiment with how you document your work. Don't think you need to just go out, take a photo on a white background. I've even seen students document their 3D work in different spaces that the work could physically exist in, and that could be really exciting to see too.
Excellent. If the work is a part of a small series or collection, especially if they work well together, would it be best to submit them once as a whole or in separate submissions? So I guess different slides are on one side.
I would go with your gut on that one and how many pieces. Keep in mind the 12 to 20 minimum maximum requirements. But other than that, it's really up to you. If the pieces are really similar from one another, I would maybe suggest just submitting the strongest pieces up from that collection as separate images. But if you think it's really important that we see all of them and you also want to submit a lot of other work, I would just submit it maybe like a video slideshow as one submission if you also want us to see other work. But if you think they all stand up on their own, you want to submit them as separate slides, go for it. There's no right or wrong way. I would say that depends on the series you're making.
Mhm. What are your thoughts, Zach, on, I mean, just speaking more to it, like direct observation? Someone asked, was asking A, is it required? And then someone else was asking, should some pictures be direct studies or should most pieces be experimentation, and the application of materials?
Yeah, first off, it's not mandatory. We have admitted students that don't showcase any drawings from observation in their portfolio. But we recommend it because it really can help build our confidence that you'd be successful, especially in the first year at RISD. So we recommend it, can build our confidence in your application. But yeah, I would encourage you not to think of it as strictly either technically from observation or strictly experimental. Art isn't quite that black or white. We really need to see how both come together to make exciting, engaging work. How can you utilize your experience working with drawing from observation? But how can you also go beyond that in the same work? How can you think about the composition? What's important to us is that you're showing us some capabilities with drawing from observation. So if you want to really experiment with the space that the whatever your drawing exists in, you can go for it. If you want to include collage or other abstract elements, go for it. If you want to make really intentional distortions here and there, go for it. There's no one right way or wrong way to create a drawing from observation, but we do need to see how your creative approaches can align with your capabilities to draw from observation. I think there's a lot of work in this presentation too that showcase that. Thinking about there's some pieces that showed us, yeah, the student knows how to draw. They have a lot of experience and expertise with drawing from observation, but they're also going beyond that. They're also thinking about content, subject matter, the mood that they're going for. That's all important to us as well.
Um, and also, this thought is gonna sound random, but it's kind of based on what we're talking about portfolio days. I just want to put out there before I forget, please know you do not have to have like a finished portfolio in order to show your work for portfolio days. These are purely for feedback. It can be at any stage. Keep in mind you get about 10 to 15 minutes, so edit the work so that you'll leave enough time to receive feedback. But this is in no way and like an interview or anything like that. It's only for feedback, and your portfolio can be like the early stages even. That's totally fine. Okay, let's see. I have an interest in product design and have many prototypes and concept ideas. What is the best way to present them in the portfolio? Do you prefer seeing the iteration process, final prototype? Do you want to see what led to the idea? Um, for example, a real problem I faced or saw someone face.
Yeah, I would advise against a very traditional industrial design format. What I mean by that is a lot of industrial designers will have this very traditional format where they have this traditional approach to marker drawings, for example, and how they write about their concepts and their iterations. You don't know if your reviewer is going to be an industrial designer or a painter or a glass blower. It can be anyone on our campus, really, any faculty or staff member. So keep that in mind, think about how it can really appeal to the foundation studies program, really showcase your creative abilities in general. It doesn't need to be in a traditional format. So yeah, I think it depends on the piece in terms of how much process you show. I would not write out lots of like mind maps and put writing on the images about how you came to your idea. We really need to see how you communicate your ideas visually. So I'd reserve any text for the description of the piece, not on the image itself. And sorry, I'm laughing because Marin's face looked very funny, or his idea looked very
What?
funny. on
I was
time.
like,
Yeah, exactly.
I would don't know what I was. I think I was just reading like, there's so many good questions, and I don't know. That's
Sure.
all it was. It was like, it wasn't any particular question, like what? It was just like, wow.
Welcome to
Thanks for calling it out. Cool, 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 cool.
But yeah, industrial design, process work. When you submit the final, if it's a process, like a visual process that you think really starts to tell a story about how you think about art and design, definitely think about submitting it. But if it's a process that is really self-explanatory just from seeing the final work, you made some drawings and then you made the final product, I think in that scenario, just the final piece, is sufficient. I think when you're working through drawing as a form of multiple iterations and you're learning from that process, or your approach to drawings in your sketchbook have a different approach to mark making. They're maybe a little bit looser, a little bit more less careful and perfectionist. That can be a great time to submit process. Essentially, if it tells us more about your artistic practice as a whole, or it's something that's really creative, maybe you make your own drawing tool or make your own object in the just the point of the process, that can be great to include. But if it's a process that we can figure out just from seeing the final work, I would just submit the final work and then maybe a few notes in the description of the piece.
Ooh, so, and forgive me if I've been multitasking. To actually go off of that, there's a few questions about speaking, letting like the description. So can you just talk a bit more about like, how lengthy should the description be? Is it required? Should you let the work speak for itself? And also, where does that description go?
Yes.
Thank
So
you.
yeah, of course. First, I'll start with where it goes. It should not be on the image. It should be on the text in Slideroom, the text input. I know I've said that a lot, but this is such a common mistake. It's such an easily avoidable one. So not on the image, just in the description in Slideroom. It'll make sense when you upload in Slideroom. There'll be a place to put title, medium, description, and an image or video. So, what do should descriptions look like? They should be short and sweet. There's a very particular character limit, a short character limit that's intentional. I once saw a student who felt like that wasn't enough space for them, and they submitted a three-page essay as an image in their portfolio. Please don't do that. It's the character limit is there. It's intentional. We have very limited amount of time to review your portfolios, and we want to spend that time looking at the work. So keep it short and sweet. If you decide to submit descriptions, descriptions are completely optional. I've seen phenomenal portfolios without a single description in them. So please don't feel as though you have to go all out of your way with writing descriptions. Just if you would like to, the option is there. And I recommend descriptions for giving us additional context about the work. Someone mentioned earlier if they should write about a cultural holiday or a reference, or translating their writing from one language to English. That's a great way to utilize the description sections by giving us additional context. Maybe you reference something that you're not sure our admissions committee will be familiar with and you want us to be familiar with it. That's a great way to utilize the description section. What I would avoid is just describing what we see visually. Keep in mind, everyone on the admissions committee, we're all artists. We all have backgrounds in art and design. We can usually figure out those kinds of things just from seeing the work itself, and the description won't really feel necessary. Great example of a description I would not recommend. I once saw a painting of a sailboat, and the description was, "This piece explores nautical themes." And I was like, well, yes, I can tell, I can figure that out just from seeing the painting itself. So I'd refrain from descriptions like that. But additional context, go for it. Absolutely.
This is a great question. How do you evaluate the technical skill in uncommon mediums like the ones shown in the presentation?
Yeah, we're really just looking for experience. Again, we're not looking for photorealism. We're looking for um creative, thoughtful ways of making. We want to see that you've put a lot of time in your practice, that you've developed a really specific way of working with the material, that maybe a way that's unique to you. That's what we're really looking for when we say technique. There's no one right or wrong technique for any material or approach. Just showing us how you can execute your thinking around art and design through different kinds of materials. I know that's a little big, but I keep in mind a lot of the work in this presentation I thought was very technically well thought out. It showed a lot of experience working with these different materials, even when it was more abstract. When you're working with abstraction, think about composition, think about mark making. These things are really important to us and will show us more experience with your practice, whether it's abstract or with an unconventional material or whatever it might be.
All right. Oh, would it be helpful to have a continuous theme or idea across the portfolio?
Great question. That's one of the few things that we have no preference with. If everything's thematically coherent, awesome. If everything's a wildly different theme and subject matter, just as awesome. That's one of the few things we have no preference on. I know AP art, IB art, they like to see thematic portfolios. We don't need to see thematic portfolios. So if some things are related and some things are of a wildly different topic, go for it. That's totally fine. It's up to you.
If I design a digital game slash interactive site, is there any way to link that in the portfolio, or do we just need to include screenshots?
Great question. You can link it, but I would be cautious about that. I would make sure that anything you really want us to see, that you include video documentation of, especially video documentation of the interaction. That would be my recommendation. The reason I say that is you can link to things in your application and your portfolio, but it's not guaranteed that the admissions committee will click on those links. It's only guaranteed that we'll see what you physically submit in SlideRoom or digitally submit in SlideRoom. Links are not 100% going to be reviewed. So yeah, I would make sure that of the most important things, you have screen recordings, screenshots of, but if you also want to include a link so that if the admissions committee chooses, they can go online and actually maybe if it's digital interact with the work, awesome, go for it. Just also include those video recordings or screenshots.
I do want to say, I meant to say this before. I see that somebody's raised their hand, and unfortunately, we can't address a raised hand, but please enter your question in the Q&A chat box. I'm doing my best to get through them all and maybe combining some similar themes. Oh, there has been some questions about master copies in any medium. What would you say about including those in the portfolio?
I would advise against it. So we prefer not to see master copies and we prefer not to see fan art because we don't want to see students recreating someone else's artwork. Do I recommend doing it as a part of your practice? Yes, that can be a really great way to think about new approaches to technique. But we don't want to see it in the portfolio just because it doesn't give us any insight into your creative practice. You're just showing us how well you can copy a Van Gogh painting or if it's fan art, we don't want to see Spider-Man or SpongeBob. We want to see your original creations. We want to see your character designs. So yeah, if it's a small reference like in a collage, that's one thing, but if it's a full master copy, just a straightforward recreation of someone else's artwork, I would not include that in the application. Or
Mhm.
but I'd advise against it.
This is a really great question. This person said that they were not planning on applying to art school, so they're starting from scratch. Do you have any tips for someone who doesn't have a lot of formal training? They're a senior this year, so they're feeling a little pressed for time and be grateful for any insight.
Yeah, I was in the same boat you were in. I didn't start making
Mhm.
artwork until my late into my junior year of high school. So yeah, I've been in your shoes. I would focus on experimentation. It's really difficult to develop a lot of experience with, say, drawing from observation in such a short period of time. So I would really focus on experimentation. I think you came to the perfect presentation for that. I would really think about how you can use materials and showcase ideas in exciting and creative ways. I think that will often be more accessible for someone that's new to art. And then once you're at RISD, you can practice the different kinds of techniques and really get drawing and other approaches to art making under your belt.
Yeah, excellent. Okay. Um, I'm feeling pressed for time. I'm like, I'm just trying to make sure I'm hitting on some topics that we haven't talked about yet. Okay, I'm not sure whether my school wants to see some of my real work experience in product design and photography, especially products that might feel too commercial because they involve brand collaboration. Should I leave these out of my portfolio and instead create a separate website to showcase them?
Um, I think that's a good idea. I say I think, I'm not very confident with my answer because it's hard for me to say without seeing the portfolio. It depends on, how obvious are those brand recognitions? Where is your voice coming into the portfolio? What is the execution like? So I think that's a really great question as well to answer in a portfolio review. But yeah, I think if you're thinking about how you can shift the execution of that work towards like an original idea or something that's really specific to you, that is certainly something I would recommend.
Excellent. Can you speak to, I've gotten a couple questions about including videos or animations. Can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, you can include as many videos or animations as you want in your portfolio. I would just be careful not to submit videos or animations that are longer than 2 to 3 minutes. You can do this. You can absolutely do that, but just know the admissions committee will likely start scrubbing around the video if it's like longer than 2 to 3 minutes. So for each video, 2 to 3 minutes ensures that we'll watch from beginning to end without scrubbing through. But if it's say like an endurance performance piece, something where that doesn't matter, it can be longer. Just know we'll likely scrub through it. But yeah, you can submit as many videos as you want. Be really careful with how you submit videos. So I recommend submitting .mov or .mp4 files because that is a very safe standard way of uploading digital documentation of your videos. What I mean by that is you can also submit YouTube links and Vimeo links, but the issue with that is that if you don't set them to either public or unlisted, we won't be able to view it. If it's set to private, we cannot view it in the portfolio. So it's a little safer to go to with .mp4 or .mov, but for whatever reason you really want to submit YouTube or Vimeo links, just make sure they're set to public or unlisted.
Mhm. Okay, let's see. So we've got a few questions about just kind of wanting to know more about technical versus conceptual. Can you speak to that and how much of each we want to see?
Yeah, I would not think of them as two separate things, especially for the purposes of our application. We really want to see how both come together to make exciting, engaging work. Nothing in your portfolio should be strictly a technical study. We don't want to see color swatches or very traditional, like I mentioned earlier, graphite drawing of a flower and vase and fruits, because that's really hard to stand out from other applicants. We want to see how you can take your experience with technique and then go further than just an exercise in technique. I think a lot of the images in this presentation showcase that. A lot of them show different experiences of working with material, of thinking in creative ways. But they weren't purely formal studies. They were really going beyond that, starting to develop a voice as an artist and designer. So yeah, I know it feels abstract. I would rewatch this. We'll post this presentation on YouTube, and you can always go into the presentation, scrub around the images, and just look at the artwork. Think about, oh yeah, I can see how this student had some experience working with wood or unconventional materials. Like there's that piece that I showed of CDs coming to make a jewelry piece. I assume that student doesn't only work in CDs in their practice, but they were very careful and intentional about how they use CDs in that piece, and that intentionality is what we're looking for when it comes to technique.
Excellent. Um, let's see. We really have time for just one more question, and they're all great questions. So thank you all for being so engaging and oh, okay, hold on. Drum roll.
Questions? I see there's 2 minutes left, one or two.
Okay, we did get a couple of questions about character designs. Can you speak to that and like what we'd prefer versus what we would not be a good idea to include?
Yeah, when you're applying to RISD, again, keep in mind you're applying to just RISD as a whole and not directly to, say, animation or illustration. So we prefer not to see very traditional character design layouts. What I mean by that is a lot of students, when they work with character design, they'll have a drawing of their character and then maybe three other drawings of different angles or different poses, and they're arranged in a very linear way. There's nothing wrong with that, but for us, because you're not applying directly to animation or illustration or concept art, that's missing out on composition, world building. Think about how you can take your character designs and develop them into full illustrations where you're really starting to think about space and composition. And instead of, verbally writing out the character's personality, how can you show them in that space, exhibiting their personality? How could the world that they're in bring out that personality? I think this is all really important to consider with character design. So yeah, I would recommend developing them into full finished illustrations because we really see traditional character design drawings as more of a process point rather than the finished piece, like a full illustration including those characters.
Mhm. Okay, this is an interesting question. Can we show personal projects and physical structures that we've built or initiated in our immediate communities?
Yeah, absolutely. Just, if other people's hands are involved in the process, I would list what your role was in contributing to that project, What did you make a specific piece of a mural? Did you design the drawing and then other people physically made it? Whatever the collaboration may be, I would just be very clear on what your role was in the making of that piece in the description inside room.
Excellent. All right, we are at the end, but I do want to also point out there's a lot of great questions that kind of speak to more questions about laying out the your portfolio, about best practices for um, showcasing, a comic book, which by the way, I'll actually squeeze in really quick. I would choose like really strong layout for one slide. And then you're welcome to put a link in the description box of like a site that'll show the whole thing. And again, we can't guarantee that your reviewer will look at the whole thing, but that's what I would do. Um, Anyway, but some questions like that and questions like, going more into the description, talking about materials, again, just documenting and laying out your work. Those can certainly be explored in upcoming online info sessions. In particular, we're doing an application prep 5, which is all about curating and presenting your portfolio. That'll be in December. So please know that this isn't the only space to get questions about your portfolio and RISD in general. So thank you, Zach, for including that there. And then, yeah, if you have any questions, I'll let Zach close it out. I was about to take the reins there, but feel free to reach out to us is what I meant. So, we're happy to answer your questions along the way for sure. But we did drop a link to upcoming info sessions and portfolio days. So tune into those.
Yeah, thank you all so much for joining. Thank you, Maren, for all of your help with the Q&A. I really appreciate it. And yeah, hope to see you all in the future. I put our email on the screen here, just admissions@risd.edu. If you ever have questions, always feel free to reach out. And best of luck, everyone, and have fun with it. It can be daunting, it's a lot of work, but we want to see your perspective. And if you're having fun, we tend to pick up on that. So hopefully you can enjoy the process and have a great night, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.